Hi everyone, I'm Ellie from Ellie's Exotics, and this here is Cheese, my Crested Gecko. We are going to be teaching you all about Crested Gecko care, so let's get right into the video. First things first, let's talk about how your Crested Gecko is going to act. Their temperament. Crested geckos have a variety of temperaments, in my opinion. They all act completely differently. Cheese here is kind of all over the place. Sometimes he's super chill and sometimes he is super crazy, but it seems like he's gonna sit nice and still for today's video. Generally speaking, your baby crested geckos are going to be a lot more flighty than your adults. I find once they get to about this size that Cheese is here, they do calm down significantly. Females and males can also have different temperaments. I find that males, once they get to a mature sort of size, they can have a little bit of attitude about them. It seems to be that once their hormones kick in, they can be a little bit more defensive, but once they're out of their teenager phase, they do tend to calm back down again. Females, though, don't tend to go through this moody teenager phase, and they generally seem to have quite a consistent temperament. Also, with crested geckos, they have that lovely tail of theirs, and that tail can come off if they do feel threatened or frightened. Or sometimes it can just pop right off for no reason. Crested geckos are one of the only New Caledonian species that will not regrow their tail. So if you are a new reptile keeper, I would actually suggest going for an adult gecko that already has lost its tail, as it takes away that stress of them losing it when you're handling them. Out of all of the New Caledonian species that I have experience with and have kept, I do find that crested geckos seem to be the ones that like to jump the most, but Cheese here is definitely more chilled out than the leopard gecko that I used to have for work. Funnily enough, that terrestrial gecko used to jump way more than Cheese. So that's how they are going to act. But what about their size? How big are they going to get? Well, Cheese here is still a juvenile, and this is how big he is right now. On average, crested geckos get about 40 to 50 grams, and with their tail, they probably get to about the length of my hand, and quite a bit stockier than Cheese is, meaning that crested geckos make the perfect handling size gecko. But just be careful with your babies though, as the babies are really teeny tiny, and they are very fragile. What about lifespan? How long is Cheese here going to live? Crested geckos on average can live about 15 years. So if you were thinking about getting your child a pet crested gecko, I would think again. Unless you as the adult are going to take full responsibility for this animal, I wouldn't really advise letting your child to make this big of a commitment at such a young age. This animal may follow your child through their entirety of university. So make sure that you have a think about where that gecko is going to go if it can't go with them. Are you ready to make a 15-year commitment to an animal like this? But one good thing about crested geckos is that if you do need to take them to university with you, they aren't going to take up much space. My recommendation for enclosure size is a 45 by 45 by 90 enclosure. I recommend keeping babies in something smaller though, so that they don't have trouble finding their food. I kept Cheese in a 30 by 30 by 45 centimeter Exoterra until he hit 15 grams. Cheese's enclosure is fully bioactive and it's got plenty of climbing opportunities. You want your enclosure to be about 80% full of stuff, of clutter, so that these guys feel nice and comfortable. Provide them with vertical branches, horizontal branches, and even different hiding spaces to prevent things like floppy tail syndrome. This is caused by inadequate nutrients and also by not having proper enrichment within the enclosure, which causes the tail to constantly have to flop backwards because they can't lie flat. One of the most important things within your enclosure is actually going to be your substrate, and that's because substrate helps retain humidity, which is crucial in keeping your gecko healthy. ProRep recently sent me their Cresty Life substrate and I am loving it. It's great for his plants and it also holds his humidity very well. But if that isn't available to you, I recommend doing a mix of topsoil, play sand, and eco-earth. You want about 60% topsoil, 30% eco-earth, and about 10% play sand. You could also swap out the play sand for something like orchid bark if you need even more of a boost of humidity. I only keep my crested geckos on substrate though once they hit 10 grams, as baby crested geckos' digestive tracts are just so fragile and so tiny, I don't like to take the risk. So keep your baby crested geckos on paper towel until they're big enough to properly digest that substrate. Change out this paper towel whenever it's soiled, and with your proper substrate, do a full substrate change every 3 months if your enclosure isn't bioactive. Impaction is a common worry that people have when it comes to using loose substrates, but did you know that one of the key factors for avoiding impaction is actually your heating? Having the right heat source will help your crested gecko break down anything that it might have eaten by accident. So for heating, I recommend using overhead heating rather than a heat mat. You want a gradient within your enclosure, nice and warm at the top and then a little bit cooler at the bottom. Use a halogen heat bulb to provide this. I quite like the Reptile System's Eco Halogen. You can either fix this on the inside of the enclosure if you have a wooden viv, or you can sit it in a dome on the top of the mesh if you have something like PVC or glass. Set the basking area to about 24 to 25 degrees Celsius. You don't want it to get any hotter than this because crested geckos are prone to overheating, but a 24 degrees basking spot is perfectly safe for these guys and it will help them break down their food. Make sure that this is connected to a thermostat. I like to use a dimming stat. You can either go for the fancy schmancy ones with a screen or just a normal standard analog dimming stat. I also like to provide my crested geckos with UVB. UVB helps reptiles synthesize the calcium and D3 that we provide them. And even if your gecko won't eat calcium dusted bugs, there's still calcium within their powder formula, which we'll talk about a bit more later, so providing them with UVB will help prevent things like metabolic bone disease. For an adult gecko, you're going to want the 7% Shade Dweller unit by Arcadia, and for a baby, because they'll be in a smaller enclosure, you're going to want to go for the 2.4% Arboreal UVB unit. Cheese loves to bask under his UVB. UVB can make your gecko's colors pop even more over time, especially with the right diet. Crested geckos are nocturnal and they need to know that it's nighttime, so have your heating and lighting on for 12 hours and off for 12 hours to create a circadian rhythm. So now we have spoke a little bit about temperature requirements and also lighting requirements. What about humidity? I think humidity is where people get the most stressed out when it comes to gecko care, and that's because they think it needs to be damp and wet and humid all the time, forgetting that in New Caledonia, these guys have plenty of different seasons where it gets drier or wetter, and that's what we want to try and replicate. Instead of doing it in seasons though, you're going to do it throughout the day. I like to spray Cheese once in the morning to give him a nice boost of humidity, and I'll also water his plants. Then throughout the day, his humidity will go from 80-90% down to about 60%. Having humidity that is high all the time can increase the chance of bacterial infections and also respiratory infections. So that's why a dry period is necessary. I then spray him again on the evening and the cycle will repeat. It will be super humid and then it will dry back down again. But if you're worried about it being too dry for your gecko, that's why substrate choice is really important, because these guys will just move down towards the bottom of their enclosure where it's colder and more humid if they feel like they need more moisture. If your gecko is hanging out on the bottom of their enclosure quite often though, then that is a good sign that the humidity is too low for long periods of time. And last but not least, let's talk about their diet. This is one of the reasons why people go for crested geckos. Their diet is very easy to achieve and it's also quite affordable. My feeding routine with a juvenile crested gecko is giving him fresh food twice a week and then feeding bugs once a week. The powder formula is a complete diet, which means that they can survive off that alone. But feeding calcium dusted bugs will help with the growth rate of your baby geckos and help keep your adult geckos nice and lean and muscly. The bugs that I like to feed are locusts, dubia roaches, and I do like to feed waxworms too, but only if Cheese needs to put on a bit of weight. 3 times a week is the perfect amount for a juvie. It keeps him nice and lean, stops him from becoming overweight and growing too quickly, but still allows for the extra growth and weight that he's going to be putting on. For babies, you're going to feed them every other day. That's how often I changed out his powder formula, and I still would only offer my babies bugs once a week. And for adults, again, I think feeding powder formula twice a week and bugs once a week works well, but you may need to adjust how much food you're actually giving them depending on their body condition. You may need to feed 3 times a week or once a week if they're starting to look a little bit skinny or a little bit chunky. As for brands themselves, you can either feed Pangea, Repashy, or Blue River diets is a good option too. My geckos were sent Blue River diets to test out, and I do have to say they absolutely love it. Honey, my gargoyle gecko, had never cleared a bowl until I gave her the dragon fruit formula by Blue River Diets. She loves it, okay? It is her favorite food. Cheese's favorite is the bug and fruit formula, and my chameleon gecko really likes the watermelon flavor. When you pick your gecko up, what you want to do is ask the breeder what flavor they're currently eating, and that's what you need to go out and buy. Crested geckos will stop eating if they feel a bit stressed, especially when they go to a new home. So feeding the exact same food that the breeder was feeding is the best way to prevent that hunger strike. So let's have one final look at the man himself, and leave your comments below now if you have any questions. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and make sure you do like and subscribe if you did. Cheese and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and we will see you all later. Bye bye.